guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "Neighbor destroyed our shared fence and pretended to own my land by planting trees." Last year, my wife and I inherited a house and some land from her uncle after he passed away. She hadn't spent much time there in many years, but we were excited to fix it up and start our family in the cute home. We were living in an apartment with our very young daughter and were looking forward to having our own house to create memories in. Unfortunately, one of the first memories I will have of our new house is dealing with the super weird and suspicious neighbor. We had only been there for about 10 minutes when he came outside and started rambling some nonsense about property lines. He kept saying that he hoped I would be more reasonable than my wife's uncle, Larry, had been about the fence. When I asked him what he meant, he stated that the fence we share is actually on his side of the property and that he wanted to remove it and plant some trees. I honestly didn't think much of it, and the idea of some trees separating the two of us didn't seem too bad. After all, the neighbor, Amos was his name, had a bunch of weird decorations and items in his yard that he must have felt were attractive, because we certainly didn't. One thing was a 4-foot-tall statue of Mickey Mouse. For the life of me I don't understand why he had that. I brush off the conversation and say that we can talk about it later and come to an agreement after we had moved everything in. The home needed some work, and we still had a few months left on our apartment lease, so we decided that we would slowly fix the place up and move things over later. I had hired some help to work on the house, while also enlisting assistance from friends and family. This was about 6 weeks after we inherited the property. I was a little surprised when I showed up for the first time in over a month to see that the fence separating our yard from Amos's had been torn down and there were some new trees planted a few feet further onto our property than the fence had originally been. I found this to be pretty annoying, considering I had told the neighbor that we would discuss this another time. Apparently, he either misheard, chose to ignore me, or is going to play dumb. Amos wasn't there and I was busy and tired, so I thought I would deal with this another time. However, I did decide that I needed to find a surveyor to have in my corner of the ring when this situation turns into a full-blown boxing match. A few weeks pass and I finally get to meet with the surveyor about the property lines. I felt confident considering I had Larry's deed and other paperwork showing where the original property was. The surveyor was great. He was quick to the point and gave me exactly what I needed to dispute this issue with Amos. I honestly did want peace with my neighbor, but I was worried he would make a big stink when I showed him the surveyor's results. Conveniently, Amos must have seen us outside that morning and realized what was up. He came out and seemed frazzled, his hair a mess and only wearing his robe and slippers. Amos approached me and asked what we were up to, which is when I explained that I had a surveyor check out the property divide so that we can know exactly where the yards ended. I also mentioned that I was wanting to put up a new fence now that he tore down the old one and that I would need him to remove his trees from my side of the property as well. Unless he just wanted me to keep them. Amos huffed and puffed and proceeded to state over and over that he knows where the property line is and that he has his own surveyor to prove it. I asked him to please show me what documents he has to support his claim. His response was grumbling, and he spun on his heel and went back into his house. I didn't hear from him for a few days. Later that week, I received a phone call from my contractor saying that he was approached by Amos asking him to tell me that he had his surveyor paperwork to discuss. I obliged and met him at the house, where he showed me some unprofessional and strange-looking paperwork by some surveyor that he hired. I asked for a copy and showed it to the gentleman I had hired and received a funny email back, laughing and stating that the documents were not done by any surveyor he had ever seen or heard of. I'm a little annoyed now. I'm trying to have patience with this man, but now he is just lying and trying to get his way by falsifying surveyor paperwork? At this point, screw Amos. He's been sketchy this whole time, tearing down fences while he knows weren't not there to stop him and planting trees on my property in order to steal my land. Who does this guy think he is? I had Amos's email at this point and sent him a generous letter saying that I would build my new fence exactly where the old one was. I also mentioned that his paperwork was garbage and that I was offended that he would treat me like I was so gullible and stupid. He replied by saying that he would be contacting his lawyer and we would hear from him soon. Too bad for Amos. My brother-in-law is a lawyer and has already been putting together our case, which would be super simple and easy to win. Brother-in-law didn't even think we would see a courtroom. There's not much disputing that Amos can do regarding the property line at this point. When his lawyer sent their hilariously weak paperwork to us, my brother-in-law simply squashed him with legal documentation and confirmation of where the property divide is. That's all she wrote for Amos. It was a few days later, but Amos did write an email back to me about how he apologized for the fuss he caused and that he hoped we could come to an agreement about the trees. I told him that there would be no agreement and that I attempted to settle this issue the nice way the first time around and that it was ultimately his loss. I built my 6-foot privacy fence right where the old one was, even a few inches closer to Amos's property because the original fence was actually a little further over than it had to be. This also meant that I could do whatever I wanted with the trees that he planted too. I decided that I didn't want to waste the pretty young birch trees and that I would just keep them. So, he has a great view of the top of them from over my privacy fence. The next story is titled, Landlords Get $1,800 Blackmail by Threatening to Torpedo Mortgage Closing, Winds Up Costing Them Half of Their Rental Properties. TLDR. Landlords blackmailed us out of $1,800 by threatening to torpedo our mortgage closure if we didn't pay up for non-existent damages. Got revenge by turning them into code enforcement and tax authorities, causing them to have to sell half their rental properties. Got them kicked out of the National Association of Realtors for ethics violations as icing on the cake. This sub made me follow up on a revenge from a few years ago, as I've finally found an appropriate audience and it succeeded even more than I had hoped. I'll try to keep this short. I rented the bottom floor of a 3-floor house for 3 years. Paid the rent on time, and other than a few times something needed repaired, we pretty much left each other alone. Got a dog and a fiancé during that time that both started living there. Documented everything through emails. They were very reasonable about the increases, no problems. Cut to about 5 months before the end of the 3rd year of the lease. We are getting married in about 6 months and decide it would make more financial sense to buy a starter house. We actually have a conversation with them to let them know we were thinking about not renewing the lease and why. An important note: the landlords were a husband and wife reality team that dabbled equally in rental ownership and being real estate agents, with the seal of the National Association of Realtors prominently displayed on every page on their website. They didn't seem especially bothered by it, but were very interested in being our real estate agents. We said we'd consider it. We wind up going with a personal family friend and finding a house that was what we were looking for, in a price range we can afford. Put in an offer, some back and forth, and they accept, and we start the closing process. So, we give 60 days notice to our landlords as required by the lease, down to the letter of the contract. They completely lose it. I'll skip over several weeks of drama and threats to the ultimate throwdown. They sue me, as they hadn't actually ever added my fiancé to the lease, important point for later, for damages to the apartment, before we had even moved out. Why? Because as they gloated several times, as real estate agents, they knew we couldn't close on a mortgage with an active lawsuit against me even if it was completely frivolous, and gleefully pointed out they could easily drag out the appeals for years. After talking to a lawyer, who very kindly gave us a consultation at much reduced rate thanks to us being referred to him from the local bar association, essentially confirmed what they were doing was super unethical, but not strictly illegal and would be very easy for them to follow through with, even if the lawsuit was completely frivolous. In the end, we paid them $1,800 in blackmail, and I had to sign a confidentiality agreement, but we were able to close on the house. Now to the revenge part. Some important notes. I'm an engineer who routinely works with municipal agencies, including the code enforcement departments, so I'm pretty familiar with codes and how the system works. The county law where I lived required that all rental properties be registered with the local township for tax purposes and issued a certificate of occupancy, which requires a code inspection, before it can be rented out. As most of the homes in the area are 50 to 100 years old, landlords routinely ignore these regulations, as the code enforcement officers are usually too busy with buildings that are actively falling down to enforce them. So, after a few months of planning, I put my plan into action. Looking at the property records in that county, conveniently all online for free, I was able to compile a list of 15 rental properties they owned in the county, except the one we lived in, due to the NDA. A quick weekend drive to take a few pictures of each one and a letter was compiled. A concerned citizen, aka my fiancé, had looked at a rental property but was concerned that cracks in the basement foundation, good luck finding a house that aged without them, might be structural, unlikely but possible, and wanted to make sure they had been inspected for safety before the certificate of occupancy had been issued. Extremely unlikely that one had ever been applied for, given our landlords. A copy of the letter for each property went to the code enforcement officer, tax official, and township council for each township for every property they owned. Condensing for space, she received several phone calls over the next few months from most of the township's officials. She stuck to the same script of being a potential renter and wanting to make sure the houses were inspected. Not one of the ones she received a call back about had been registered or inspected, and since all of this was now documented in their books, they were going to enforce the regulations. I don't have the actual numbers, but I imagine costs of upgrading one 100-year-old house to the current rental code, much less 15, must be in the tens of thousands, not even considering the fees and penalties for not paying the correct, higher, taxes for years. Surprisingly, we never heard anything from our former landlords, though I like to think after that mountain of government hurt landed on them, they got a lawyer smart enough to tell them to stop poking the angry bear. I just ran a search in the property records for them again, and it seems they're now down to 8 rental properties in that county. It looks like a majority were sold within a year of us moving out, several at a loss. So, assuming we were the cause, it looks like $1,800 in blackmail cost them over $30,000, just in the sale of those properties at a loss, and almost half their rental income, not even considering the price of getting their other properties up to code. The icing on the cake, I CC'd my fiancé on a lengthy email chain from their business emails in which they conducted themselves in a completely unprofessional manner and admitted to some extremely unethical, though not illegal, practices, such as admitting the lawsuit was completely frivolous, but it didn't matter because I'd pay up if I ever wanted to get a mortgage. They were stupid enough to reply back to all. So, a copy of that entire email exchange was forwarded by my fiancé to the ethics officer and president of the local chapter of the National Association of Realtors they were members of, as well as the national ethics officer, using the links to each organization they so helpfully had on their website. Got follow-ups from both asking if she wanted to file an official complaint, however she explained that due to the confidentiality agreement, we didn't think we could file an official complaint without getting into shaky legal ground, but we wanted them to know what kind of people were using their organization's name and reputation. They said it was definitely something they would look into, but we never heard anything back. When I went to their website tonight, all of the National Association of Realtors references had been removed, and according to the membership list on the website, they are no longer members of the local chapter. I like to think we had a hand in that. The next story is titled, "Didn't Pay for Fireplace. Ended up with a house full of smoke." A friend of mine used to install wood stoves and sell firewood. He still sells firewood but stopped bothering with fireplaces. This one guy bought a fireplace and wanted it installed. My friend did this but told him he would need a higher chimney for better air drawing. The guy refused it. I'm assuming maybe he didn't want a higher chimney for the look, and my friend kept insisting. The owner said no, and when the fireplace was done, he complained it was hard to get a fire going, due to the chimney being too short, leading to poor drawing of air. My friend came with a chimney extension, and it worked fine, but he decided he didn't want to pay still, even though the job was done, and done well. So, a few weeks later my friend was passing through the area and saw nobody was home, but there was a fire going to keep the house warm. Owner must have been at work. So, my friend climbed up onto the roof and got his chimney extension back. It was a plus, but not enough to cover everything that was installed, and the time put in. Where things get funny is that once he took the extension off the chimney, due to poor drawing of air, the house started to fill up with smoke as the fire burned. The owner must have come home to a thick smoke-filled home. Try getting that smell out of stuff. Probably a layer of soot on everything. To my recollection, the owner did not have any pets, so no lives were harmed, but when everything you own is black and reeks like smoke and your home is freezing in the middle of winter, I bet you would rather have paid someone for their products and services. I hate people like that. When they know from the point they hire you, no matter how good of a job you do, they will try to find some reason not to pay you. The last story is titled, "Live in a rental for over a year without paying rent? Good luck in jail." TLDR. Squatters lived over a year rent-free. Husband ends up in jail. This has all been finalized, so I decided to post it, For obvious reasons I didn't want to post it while it was ongoing. Last summer I bought a house trailer and decided to rent it out. It needed some work, so I posted 2 months free rent for putting carpet down in the living room, hooking up the hot water heater and putting in a toilet. Got a nice couple with a newborn willing to do it. Great. No lease, month to month. No security deposit and the rent was $450 a month. So, they did the work, so I didn't ask for rent for 2 months. Everything was fine. Side note. There are a few little state laws that come into play. If you don't pay rent for 3 consecutive months you are considered a squatter, which means the landlord doesn't have to fix the property and can actually padlock it and deny you entry. If you're on house arrest and get formally evicted, you could be violated for it. Also, you can be formally evicted even if you have already moved out so the landlord can get rent due. Also, even though there are eviction bans, if it happened before the ban then it can still go through. Plus a few other conditions that still allow someone to be evicted. It's up to the judge really. Fast forward 5 months and still no rent money. Yes, they had a newborn, and they were young and didn't have a lot of money, but the husband can spend $1,500 on a new engine for his project car. They can afford to go out to eat and spend money on electronics, but no rent. So, after that 3rd month I did nothing. The weather was turning cold. I didn't put in the furnace like I promised, and if they hadn't had a newborn, I would have padlocked the house. They were bragging about their tax refund. I gave them a shot to catch up and they basically said that they knew their rights and were in a rent strike, illegally I might add. You will see later. COVID happened, husband got laid off, so I gave them a break. When he went back to work, I asked for back rent again and was told to duck off. I finally had enough. I told them they had 14 days to get out or I was doing a formal eviction, and seeing he was on house arrest he knew what that meant. I honestly was trying to keep him from having to go back to jail and keep an eviction off of their record. I was trying to be nice and civil. So, they left, and I cut my losses, until I checked the property. Everything they put in the removed. Everything they got free rent for was gone. I got pissed and filed for a formal eviction. It didn't go as they hoped. They said I didn't provide heat, so they went on a rent strike. Only they didn't file that with the courts or hold the money aside. They just thought they could stop paying rent. What they put into the trailer was less than the rent. The judge agreed with me that seeing they took everything I was due those 2 months' rent. And the biggest. He started slamming my character, so I said, well, you didn't tell me you were going to be going on house arrest when you rented the property before then. The judge looked bored, but he perked up. He asked them if that was true, they responded that it was, and he was ready to make his ruling. I received 15 months back rent at $450 a month and $2,000 in damages because the way they removed the stuff they damaged a lot of things. As for him, the judge said he had no choice but to turn the eviction over to his parole officer. Fast forward to this month. His house arrest was violated, and he was arrested. They actually had the nerve to ask me to speak on his behalf. I didn't. Ruling was his remaining 6 months are now being spent in jail. They have a bad eviction on their record, and they owe me money. Know the law before you play the game. Update. I forgot to add that social media blasted me like I was the scum of the earth. Thanks for listening.